And good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another live Xanadu Gallery Art Business Academy online critique group session. Let me see if I can get some video going here. There we are. I got it. Good to have you all here this morning for another session. Today is Wednesday, January 27th. 2021. And just by way of getting started here, it looks like I've got Renae in the session. I'm going to have you all on mute as we get started. You'll still be able to hear. We can bring you in and unmute you as we get to that point in the presentation. By way of announcement, you'll notice that we started today's session looping through some of your artwork and artist statements. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about artwork and artist statements, and I gave you a homework assignment to send in some images and statements. To say I was overwhelmed with the response would be putting it mildly. Received dozens and dozens and dozens of statements. And so what we're going to do, and you can continue to send those in, at least for the present, we're going to have those rotating through as we start the session, kind of in the 10 to 15 minutes leading into the session where we can see those. You can see your artwork there, read through the statements. I am going to do some formalizing of the process of sending them in, so it makes it a little bit easier for us to process those images in your statements and include your name and et cetera. So watch for a form that will be coming for those submissions. But we're also going to be talking about some of those in upcoming sessions as well. And with that, I want to jump in and welcome our featured artist. Looks like Renae, I've got you here. I'm going to have you unmute now. It should be asking you to open up. Good morning, Renae. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
And so, Renae, let's start with just a little. Well, actually, let's start with where you are coming to us from. I think it's somewhere much colder than where I am.
Interestingly enough, I'm in St. George area at the
moment.
moment.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, we're just staying here at a B&B for a few months to get out of the cold. But I am from Boise, Idaho, and it's really not that cold, but cold enough that we wanted to get out of town.
Get out of town. And St. George is not a bad place to do it for those who've been there. It's beautiful surroundings and certainly has some nice winter weather there. Tell us a little bit, Renae, about your background and how you came to be interested in art and create the art that you're creating.
Okay, it's similar to your story a little bit, except that I became an artist and you didn't. But
yes,
my dad was an artist, and we grew up in Southern California, and he went to art school at Chenard's on the GI grant. And I grew up around art as being the most normal thing in the world. And so he taught me how to draw really well. And I just eventually went into watercolor. Watercolor is really my main medium. I can do them all, but watercolor is the one I really love. And so I went to college in graphic art for just a year, and then realized that taking workshops and being just directed to exactly what I needed seemed to be a better fit for me. And so that's what I've done over the years, is taken workshops and given workshops. And I found that actually teaching workshops teaches me as much as I'm teaching. And so that's been helpful. And over the years, I've been doing art shows in Canada and the Western United States. And that's really what I focused on, was the shows and what I could just glean from a contact list and work those clients. And
so now you mentioned you've done shows in Canada, and of course that makes you an internationally collected artist.
Well, there you go.
We all like to have on our resume.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit, have you, in kind of terms of pursuing your art career, has it always been your primary pursuit in life? Have you had another career? How long have you been professionally pursuing art?
30 years. It's just been forever. I've been a mom of 6 kids, and so that's taken me my attention. But now that my grandkids are doing their own thing, I'm really pursuing my art career even that much more. And it just takes a lot of time and really knowing the direction. This has been such a different year because the art shows went kaput. And so I just thought, this is a good time for me to really get my marketing and just figure out how to do more avenues of my art. Look into galleries, look into I do a few galleries, but mostly it shows. And so I'm really working hard on the marketing end of my artwork right now too.
And what about production? How many pieces in a typical year are you creating?
Probably about 50.
So roughly a piece a week.
Work. Yeah, probably. I guess more than that. Then I can do more than a piece a week, probably. But an average of 50, because every week isn't like that. So
Yeah,
probably
sure.
50 to 60. I really need to figure that out, how many I do in a year. But
well, excellent. Let's jump in and take a look at the art, and just talk to us as we're looking through these pieces. How typical is this, the 5 pieces that we're seeing in terms of subject matter? What draws you to these various subjects?
I'm primarily a portrait artist. That's what I'm best at is portraits. But I just like so many different themes. And I know that that's a challenge with, I like it to tell a story. And so this piece called Steadfast is this cowboy, if you will, just walking in the morning mist. And people come by my booth and they have so many stories about this. Some people think it's Burt Reynolds. Yeah, but there are stories. There are stories about this that people come up with. What's he thinking about? And that's really what I try to convey in my art, is what kind of story is it telling? And so this one is in the Sawtooths. I don't know if you've been to the Sawtooths in central Idaho. They're magnificent mountains in the Stanley, Idaho area. And,
yeah, a little bit lesser known than maybe the Tetons, but
right.
Just beautiful country, rugged wilderness.
Right.
I did grow up traveling up there. We would have family reunions at Redfish Lake.
Redfish Lake, yeah.
Unmute
know that
speaker
country
to hear
well.
other participants. I don't hear anyone.
Oops. Sorry, I've got you all on mute, and we'll get you all into the conversation in just a few minutes.
Okay. So okay. I was just gonna mention.
I can take you back to that one, no problem.
Okay. I like to do snow because I love shadows. And so anything with white gives me the ability to have shadows. And the shadows gave me the opportunity to have the directional, that we've got a Z going on here with the directional, with the shadow coming off of those weeds. And so that was really fun to do. I love doing antique autos. And so, of course, this is a story. What's happening to this woman in the 30s? It's a Buick 30 Buick. And so she's standing here waiting for someone to open the door for her. And, she's in the period costume. But I love doing tight detail in the antique autos. So that's another theme that I go into. And this is a gentleman that I met in a market in Paris with my daughter. And I just went up to him and I said, "You have an interesting face." He could hardly speak English. "And can I paint you?" And so this is an example of something that I would do as a commission. do a lot of portrait commissions, dog portraits, that sort of thing. But yeah, I love the light coming off of his face. So that's really what I focused on with this Frenchman. And I love doing trees. This is the reds of the foliage really make those aspen, well, the birch trees pop. And so I've done a whole series of birch and aspen trees. So they're really fun to do.
And then let's just look quickly at presentation and talk about kind of your approach to framing and presenting the work, because what we're seeing here is certainly a little different than what people might anticipate or expect with watercolor.
Okay, yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. So what I do with my watercolor, instead of putting it behind a mat and glass, is I wrap the watercolor paper around a canvas. I wet the paper, wrap it around it, staple it in the back, and then it shrinks. It shrinks around it so it's as tight as a drum. Then I do the painting after it's wrapped. And once the painting's completed, I seal it with an archival spray varnish. And this gives the clarity so much more of an advantage over glass and matte. And I find it's really a challenge with watercolor to differentiate between a print and an original piece, because a lot of times they look the same. They're framed the same. And so I think that has given the watercolor the challenge, competing against oil and acrylic paintings is just the framing. And so I switched over to oil for a while because I couldn't compete. Galleries wouldn't even look at me with watercolor. And so I switched to oil, and I couldn't do it. I hated oil. It was just so stiff. And so I just started researching on the way to frame it differently. And this is what I've come up with. And wow, has it been a game changer for me.
Yeah, how do people respond? What's the conversation that occurs when people are looking at the work and they can see this isn't a typical watercolor? And so how does that conversation typically unfold?
Pretty much the same as what I've just explained. And I explained to them that the clarity is so much better without the glass over it. And it's protected by this varnish. And so it's just like you would hang an oil painting. You know, it's pretty much the same. You're protecting it with varnish.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think this is and this is good for us to kind of jump in and bring the group into the conversation. And so here's one of the emails that came in. I think we just got the answer to it. Was wondering if you have chosen to frame the artwork without glass for a particular reason, no protection there, non-glare issue. These days we can put glass over works of paper without matting and spacers for the frame. But for you, it sounds like it was a very conscious decision that you moved in that direction, and you don't have any doubts about it. You're not going back.
Oh, no, it sells well and no one questions it. In fact, most people, it never even comes up. Someone might say they're confused at whether most people think it's oil. They'll come and say, oh, is that oil? No, it's watercolor. Really? Oh, and then they just start talking about how you can get that much detail with watercolor. It's a non-issue as far as the framing goes to most people.
Well, I would love, and let's open up the discussion. I'd love to hear those of you in the panel, your reactions to the work in terms of both the subject matter and style of the work, the medium and presentation. Do you feel the work is consistent, as we typically like to talk about? Who wants to jump in first with a comment? You can just throw a hand up, or let me go to Kate first. Get you unmuted here.
Okay, Your work is brilliant. I remember one of the questions was you were wondering if the subject matter was consistent. It all is. It's all about the West, and your color and your medium. It all works together. And I think, getting away from the glass and matte is wonderful. I think people in galleries almost stereotype watercolor with mattes and glass. Not to mention, it's a real hassle dealing with glass.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think you bring up a couple of really interesting points, and let's take both of those in turn. First, the consistency. And those of you who have been in these sessions for a while will remember that as we're talking about consistency, and especially about the way I kind of think about consistency, is that I try to be somewhat objective and systematic in evaluating artwork for consistency. And I'm looking at primarily kind of 6 key elements: the subject matter, the style of the work, the thematic elements across the body of work, the palette that's being used, and then the presentation and format of the work. And it's not that you have to be 100% consistent in all of those areas in order to create a consistent body of work. Rather, if you have 3 or 4 of those elements highly consistent, it allows you some latitude for some variety in other areas. And so I think as we look at Renae's work, we can see that, yes, there is some variety in terms of the subject matter, but thematically, as Kate mentioned, kind of looking at a lot of Western scenes. Certainly, we see some consistency there. And then I think the strongest element that I see of consistency is in the style. And I forgot to mention medium is another important one. And the style and medium here are just so consistent that you really then get latitude to move across different subjects and even themes, and still maintain that consistency. Now, to the second point about watercolors, and Kate, I think you used the word stereotyping. I might use the word prejudice. That for whatever reason, there has developed over the years this view of watercolor, and I think also to maybe a similar but maybe slightly lesser extent to pastels and really any work that needs to be protected by glass. There's just come to be this perception for whatever reason that it's more challenging to display and sell. And I think it's a shame. And I do work with artists who are working behind glass and who are building very successful careers selling watercolor and pastels in traditional matted formats. But there's no doubt that they have had a bit more of an uphill battle in terms of fighting their way into galleries and building a collector base, which to a certain extent, some of it is also just that there are swings in kind of what becomes popular and what's less popular, and it's cyclical and changes over time. I think it's a shame. I personally, Carrie and I love watercolor and pastel and gouache and have collected a number of pieces over the years. And there are just some things that you can achieve in those media that you can't achieve in other media. And so we're always on the lookout for interesting works in other media. And I think that though Renae has done something here with her approach to format that has kind of turned a potential weakness into a strength. And by innovating and kind of problem solving has created something that's very interesting. I would love to take further feedback. Terry, I think I see you've got a comment. Let me, should pull you in and ask you to unmute there. Good morning, Terry.
Hi, Renae, your work is amazing. I was looking at your portfolio, and because you ask about consistency of subject matter, I deal with the same situation.
Uh-huh.
If you categorized in your portfolio, if you grouped your work, I find as a customer looking at your website, I'm thrown a little bit by starting out with all Western and then suddenly switching to more of a village scene or a French countryside scene.
Mhm.
And I think if those were categorized, I might not have that feeling that you're all over the map. I think you
Yeah.
have some, I was looking for themes within your website. You have strong ones. I just think they need to be grouped together.
That's am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
Yep, gotcha.
That's really interesting that you point that out. And I just, the last month or so, I just changed my website from having it completely categorized. And now I'm now I'm really questioning that. I just wanted to have a clean, get to the front page look, and now I'm seeing that. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think I'm going to go back to the way I had it, completely categorized.
Yeah, I agree with Terry. I think there's some real power in kind of creating an intentional narrative across your work, and the idea of grouping like works together. Someone is visiting a website or even in a gallery space. I kind of have to think about, what is the narrative experience that they're going to have as they move from piece to piece. And as Terry says, it can be a little bit jarring if there's kind of some dissonance created if I'm moving from subject to subject and then back to a subject. And so putting like pieces together and then trying to find, if you can, find some transitions from one piece to the next, where one could imagine that it would make sense from purely nature scenes to then go to some scenes with nature and structures, village, that kind of thing, and then to people or other way around. But by doing that, you're kind of creating that. People love stories, and they're kind of able to start to create a story around that. Terry, you wanted to add something.
Just one more thing, and that is that this is just something to think about. The picture at the beginning of your portfolio, if you can find one that is not totally West, not totally, but something that combines your elements. And then we're not set up to expect a certain cohesion in your portfolio. I love the picture you have at the front, at the top, but it does set us up to expect something.
Yes, that's a good point.
So
Yes.
something maybe a little bit more universal across the different subjects, or even a lot of times Terry, you're talking about the website and the experience that we're having on the website, or did you see a separate?
No, I was talking about the website, and I love the piece that you've chosen. I don't. That's why this is just a thought, not a suggestion.
Yeah, and what I had before was a scenery piece, and that is kind of an in between. The scenery is my in between. I don't feel like it's my strongest work. My scenery is more difficult for me to produce, and so I will put the scenery up there for a while. It depends on what I'm promoting on my other social media. I might put scenery up for a while, and then I'll put a portrait up for a while. And so that's a good point, is to just have something sort of mid-ground. Would you say that scenery is a good mid-ground?
I would say something like your birch trees with maybe a less distinguished writer somewhere. I don't know. I have the same issue with my genres of work, and trying to find something that combines the same technique, colors, but then I've woven the two elements together in a scene. So it might be something you create especially for your website.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that.
Yeah, and it's not a bad idea to be keeping the homepage fresh, to have a new imagery there regularly. A lot of website builders will allow you to do a rotating slideshow, which then creates some motion and gives us a little bit more of a sense of a range. But generally, I agree with the idea that someone hopping onto your website the first thing they see is your shot at giving them a good first impression of your work and giving them a sense of what they're going to see. And again, because your strengths are your style and the medium that you're using, I do think you have some latitude to move through different imagery there and to invite people to explore. Generally, I think your website does a great job of just being straightforward and clean and easy to navigate and get into the artwork.
That's good.
Any other comments on the work, Linda? Linda Armstrong, I think I've got you. Let me pull you in. Should be asking you to unmute.
Okay, when you started, you said that you were a portrait artist, and I've got to tell you that you're fabulous, and that the landscape artists are a dime a dozen, and
careful now, Linda, careful.
Well, I mean, it's just there are a lot more people who can do landscape than can do portraits like you do. And I'm sure you do very well with your portraits. Do you get a lot of commissions?
That's primarily what I do, is commission work from shows.
Now I need to ask you, are you tired of doing that?
No.
Okay, so then if I were you, if it were me and I had that kind of talent, I would, what you have is something that not very many people can do, and that you are doing well with it. So while it's true that you should change up, and certainly on social media, especially like Instagram, if you do if you go someplace and you do a special landscape that you like, you can do that. But I would kind of focus on yourself as a portrait artist, and then have those other things in order of the way that you like to do them, so that you're happy, especially if you are really enthusiastic. I mean, somebody who can capture expression and personality like that, even in the cowboy, it's really a full figure portrait. I mean, they used to do portraits of people on horses, that it's a convention. So I would kind of lead with the people if I were you, but that's just me, because not everybody can do that.
Yeah, those are really good points. And that's really what I wish I could do. And the reason I'm all over the board is because really it's easier to sell a landscape. More people want landscapes. It's very difficult to sell portraits. And so I have portraits in my booth and on my website to show what I can do as a portrait, but there's still a harder sell.
It's true. If they're of strangers, I have a lot of pictures of people too. Mine are a totally different style, a lot less, more expressionistic. But yeah, you're right. People don't want pictures of other people. Yeah. But you're going to be able to get a lot of commissions once enough people see what you do, because there aren't very many people that can do that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your compliments, and that's really what I'm working on, is trying to get that audience to pick up portraits. And believe it or not, there's an ocean of portrait artists as well. Very good. Very good portrait artists.
Well, I know there are a lot of them, but you're right up there with any of them. You really capture personality. And one thing that makes your work so consistent is that lovely palette. I mean, even though the colors are different, especially like the lady by the car, they still have that kind of muted quality, the value. Yeah. And it's very consistent, and it's just beautiful.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I like to say, to tell people in my booth, especially people that aren't artists, people that don't understand art, they think that you're going from one color to the next color to the next color and not mixing them all together. And so I'll show them my palette. These are the 4 colors I use for this. And it's going to be the
That's
same as this purple car, as the same as this portrait I'm doing. It's all the same, 4, maybe 5 colors, but really primarily 3, the triad colors. And that always gets people interested, like, how do you do that? How do you use just 3 colors? And so that's what I strive to do, to keep everything cohesive. Even with all the different themes, it helps to keep things cohesive by using 3 or 4 colors.
Yeah,
just the color.
absolutely.
That's
them all together. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is an interesting this discussion. It's almost as if you really have 2 parallel businesses going between portraiture and landscape and figurative subject matter.
Oh, that's only just a few. I've got a whole series of wild animals that I do,
Yeah.
and that's popular. Those are easier to sell.
Those
Wild
are very
animals I can
popular.
sell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've had experience working with artists who do commission portrait work, and there have been we've done some experiments with showing some pieces in the gallery, and the idea that maybe we could generate some commissions for the artists through the display in the gallery, and we've just never really gotten traction with that. That in a gallery setting, especially. Folks are primarily interested in coming in and experiencing something that they can take away with them or that can be delivered right away and hung on the wall. So we haven't had as much success there, but I do know a good number of artists who have built a strong network or a strong business of portraiture work through word of mouth, through social media advertising, it kind of becomes a bread and butter and can generate some really good business for them. But they do almost treat it as a separate business from the art that they're putting out into galleries. Renae, now let's talk a little bit about pricing. This is a subject we always like to get into in these sessions, and the reaction is typically similar for all of us, but when it comes to pricing, talk to us a little bit about how you've arrived at the value for your work.
Well, I do. Let me see. I do it by size. So I will take 22 by 24 and times it by 0.15 or 1 or 2. And come up with that price. And I stay pretty consistent, whether it be a show or a gallery. I find that a real challenge to keep it low enough for a show, high enough for a gallery, and having it consistent over the board. You don't want to see something that is higher in the gallery and a different price on your website. So I try to keep it consistent, but that's how I do it. I just times it 18 by 24 times. Let me make sure I'm doing this. Yeah.
Well, and how did you decide on that multiplier? How did you come up with the numbers that you're coming up with?
I started out with 0.1, then I went to 1.5, then I raised it. That's the way I raise my prices and keeping it consistent. I don't know where I came up with the idea. In fact, it might have been you.
Yeah. Well, I am a big advocate of consistency in pricing and pricing by the square inch for sure. It's a challenge. The real challenge comes early in an artist's career as they're beginning to sell artwork, and you've got to come up with that initial price point. As you get sales under your belt and you get experience going, again, it comes back to kind of supply and demand, and the more demand there is, the more you can raise your prices over time. I do think, and I wonder about this, Renae, do you differentiate between price points on landscape and thematic work and your portraiture work, or is the pricing similar?
It's similar, and I'm starting to move away from that. Like the painting of this of the cowboy steadfast. I increased that because I liked it. I wanted to keep it. I didn't want to sell it, and so I increased the price from the regular price point, and someone bought it. They bought it anyway, and so
Could there be a lesson to be learned there?
yeah, I know. Yeah, put the ones I really like. And I'm starting to increase my prices on smaller portraits because they're more work.
Yes.
A smaller portrait is more.
Yeah, that's what I wondered. There's got to be more work that's going into your portraiture, I would think, and time than is going into the landscape work and other works that you're creating.
It really depends. I can do a portrait so much faster than a landscape sometimes because landscapes are difficult for me. Portraits, I've done portraits since I was 12 years old, and it's easier for me.
So let's talk about pricing. I'd love to have those of you in the panel jump in with any comments or reaction that you have to Renae's pricing. Terry.
So this is a question as well as a comment. I'm a pastelist. I almost feel like I have to keep my prices high to say, not beyond the sales point, but high enough to say that pastels are as valuable as oils. Yeah. I know it's a defensive move sometimes, but I feel like if you price your watercolors or pastels at a low price point, you're also agreeing with the fact that they're a lesser medium.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a question for Jason too.
Yeah, certainly we want to be aware of what's going on in the marketplace and how other pastelists or watercolor artists are pricing their work. But I would want to do that based on pastelists and watercolorists and artists using gouache who are at a level we want to be, that we aspire to be, not the general market of work behind glass or in those media, but the market that we aspire to. And I can tell you, and I have bought from artists whose work in those media per square inch is higher than comparable oil painters or acrylic artists. And I sometimes think that we overthink medium and play into that narrative that's been created. We want to avoid doing that and let the work start to kind of create its own market. But you're right, you definitely don't want to undervalue the work because of that. And as you start to get collectors, you'll find that your passionate collectors are just as excited to collect your work as the collectors of work in other media. And so we want to give them the value that they're seeking, and we do that by pricing it and valuing it at an appropriate level.
And I agree with that. Excuse me. My challenge is I've got this at a sweet spot of what I can get people to pay with the type of shows I'm doing.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to get into shows, the higher level shows. Sometimes I've got into Park City. I've got into Celebration of Fine Art right there in Scottsdale. But then I do lower end shows too. Yeah. When I was at Celebration of Fine Art, those prices were way higher than that. And so I had to come back down when I went home and didn't do those bigger shows. Excuse me. So the challenge is keeping it consistent with the market that you are presenting it to.
Yeah. And this will be an echo of conversation that we've had repeatedly over the last several months, where you've heard me kind of beat on the drum that pricing is not only a reaction to the market, it's also a choice about where you're going to be choosing to show your work. And, ultimately, you're right, Renae, that you can really run into a little bit of, it's a challenge. You can kind of box yourself in a little bit where you have to make that choice at some point, where you can no longer say, those low end shows, I just almost can't justify doing them anymore.
Yeah.
Even though they do generate some revenue, and so it's a balancing act. Trying to replace the volume that you're maybe getting at those shows that command lower price points with a more steady, stable volume at the higher end. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it is a balancing act. And as you move forward, you're just more and more likely to find that the shows that can't sustain the higher prices need to be put by the wayside, so that you can focus your efforts on venues that can command those higher prices.
Yeah, I guess it's
And I think I see Diane. Do I have you in? And did you have a comment or a question? Maybe not. Well, let me go to Melanie. Still got you. There we go.
Okay. I was just going to ask Renae, on the lower priced shows, have you tried using your regular prices? I mean, to see, because as you become more well known, I would think people would say, oh, I've heard about this artist and I would love to collect her work, type thing. And they are willing to pay more. I'm not familiar with that show, but.
Well, I do the local shows in the Idaho area, and then try to get a few shows that are higher end, like Park City. They're just so difficult to get into, and I haven't been able to get into them for a few years. But no, I just haven't tried it, because it's such a commitment of time and money spent. And if you go into the show and put your prices up high, you've really stepped into, now I've got to do it. I've got to have it this high. And if I don't sell, then I've wasted that time. It's just a big jump to take to raise the prices. And you've got to be serious and be consistent with it, because you can't go in really high and then come back, well, never mind, I'm going to go low again. You lose credibility there too.
Yeah.
And so just like Jason was saying, it's you've got to know where and when to jump. And I'm right in the middle of that right now, is where to jump.
Yeah. Well, and I would say this too, for those of you who are kind of dealing with pricing and thinking about taking leaps and moving into new markets, there is some real wisdom in any venue where you are showing your work, to neither being the highest priced or the lowest priced in that particular venue.
Right. And that's where I'm at.
That those artists are the most likely to have the least volume of sales, because of the psychology of pricing and the experience that viewers are going to have as they're attending the show. It's just almost inevitable that the set point and their experience that they're having is going to be set by that. And so again, that being the case, and I will say that there are some exceptions to that. And whenever I go to an art festival or show, you will frequently find artists who are at price points that are significantly different, either higher or lower, and that they're doing well. But those artists have gotten there through long experience and have seen that their volume is just so good where they're doing it that they can be an exception to that rule. In general, though, when it comes to pricing, I want to be in the mid-market of the venues that I'm showing in. And so that being the case, again, as I set my pricing and I strive for more and more consistency, it becomes more of an issue of saying, okay, what shows, what festivals can sustain me at those price points? And if my price points don't fit into the venue, again, it's time to maybe think about Xing that particular venue off and going out and finding market. And we live in a very diverse, broad art market. There are opportunities out there for every artist at every price point. It becomes a question of then being very selective about the venues that will be right for your work and for your prices. Now, having said that, and kind of doing some analysis on your price points, Renae, in that you're in a price range that fits into a pretty broad market. I calculated your per square inch price at between $1.50 and $2.25 per square inch. That's a pretty solid price point for galleries. And I would think, and this last year has certainly been an opportunity for us all to reevaluate the mix that we have between shows and more permanent venues, where the shows have really suffered because of the pandemic this last year, that it's been a good idea to have also some bricks and mortar locations that have been able to keep open, maybe limited, but still have the traffic and that going on. And so I would suggest that it's good for all of us to be thinking about expanding the variety of venues in which we're showing our work, so that by diversifying, you can kind of stabilize the exposure that you're getting and the sales that you're getting. And of course, we spend a lot of time here, and I spend a lot of time working with artists who are seeking to get gallery representation. And Renae, I would encourage you to kind of expand that reach. That I'm not sure how many galleries you're showing in now, but it's always good to have one more and to be looking for opportunities. And maybe if you're having a hard time getting into the show in Park City, maybe it's not a bad idea to have a gallery in Park City showing your work and getting the exposure there. Or Jackson Hole, your work would fit very well into a lot of the markets in Colorado and Idaho and Utah and kind of Western marketplaces. I would be looking for that. You guys, we've done it. We always do this. We've gone over our time frame here and had a great discussion. I appreciate all the input. Renae, thank you so much for letting us take a look at your work and sharing some background. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk about your artwork.
Comments have been so helpful. Yes.
And again, we'll be back here next Wednesday, same time, same place, doing more artwork review. And again, keep an eye out. I'll be sending out kind of a formal way for you to submit your artwork and artwork statements to go into the rotation before the session. So keep an eye out for that as well.